For many years I've lived with the memory of having been beaten so badly with a leather and sheet metal strap that no one could even recognize who I was when I left the White House torture chamber. I and hundreds of other boys were beaten so badly by employees of the state of Florida that many, including myself, had to have our underwear or our pajamas surgically removed from our buttocks by a physician. I have talked about and written hundreds of stories about the abusive treatment we children suffered, some as young as 9 years old, while in the custody of the Florida School for Boys at Marianna. Most of the boys I knew were sent to the reform school for crimes such as skipping school or smoking cigarettes. Several years ago I sat down and I began to write a book titled The White House Boys, An American Tragedy. That book was released today. Will be in bookstores, I think, on Monday. The book details most of the types of abuses that we children suffered. But there's one aspect that the book does not cover, that being, why did these abuses continue for so many years? The answer is very clear. This matter is under investigation right now by the FBI, the United States Department of Justice Civil Division, and the state of Florida. But they're not going to look into this matter because this is the real reason behind the beatings, the abuse, the rapes, and the murders. They're looking at the 32 graves that were found out in the woods. But that's not even a small portion of the amount of boys that went missing, anywhere from 50 to 200 over a period of 30 or 40 years. The Florida School for Boys at Marianna was being managed by the Department of Agriculture. Hundreds of acres of vegetables, peanuts were being grown, as well as a cattle ranch, a slaughterhouse, a dairy farm, and several other branches meant to supply the institution with food and milk. What is not known is that some of the Florida officials were selling off tons of meat, vegetables, and milk to the Marianna local merchants and other Jackson County area stores. Over a period of 40 years, millions of dollars changed hands. What does this have to do with the beatings, rapes, and murders? There were times when complaints were lodged against the state of Florida for these abuses. However, those in charge would not allow anyone to talk with the boys at the school for fear that they would tell that they were being loaded onto buses, carried to downtown Marianna, and forced to load and unload railroad cars full of grain and cattle feed, sometimes 16 hours a day. If the child labor aspect became known, then there was a possibility that someone might expose the larger issue, that being the sifting off and changing hands of millions of dollars worth of meat, vegetables, peanuts, and milk. The sadists in charge of the reform school were having a ball raping, beating, and killing young boys, and no one could do anything for fear that the entire mess would be exposed. The boys were looked upon as just a bunch of school-skipping, cigarette-smoking little bastards who could not follow direction anyway. So much of the local community just looked the other way. I must add that there were a few in the community who tried to step forward but were told that their homes might be burnt to the ground, their cattle might be poisoned, their farm loans could be recalled, or they might even be shot should they open their mouths. To make sure that the boys did not escape and open their mouths about what was going on at the school, the authorities sent word out to the surrounding counties that anyone who caught a boy, dead or alive, would be given $100 and a side of beef. And in the 1950s, that was a lot of money. So, while the local community and the officials at the state of Florida Reform School for Boys dined on steak and pork chops, the other boys, such as myself, ate mashed potatoes, grits, cornflakes, and scrap meat. As we can see now, there's a lot more to this story than will ever be known. Many of the boys have put their stories in a book called A Brotherhood of Children. It tells of the abuses. It tells of the horror and the blood. It was some of the most horrible stories I've ever read. It was just heartbreaking.